双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Part 1. Vengeance is mine. I will repay. Chapter 1. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Everything was in confusion in the Oblonsky's house. The wife had discovered that the husband was carrying on an intrigue with a French girl, who had been a governess in their family, and she had announced to her husband that she could not go on living in the same house with him. This position of affairs had now lasted 2 days. And not only the husband and wife themselves, but all the members of their family and the household were painfully conscious of it. All the members of the family and the household felt that there was no sense in their living together, and that even stray people brought together by chance in any inn had more in common with one another than they, the members of the family and the household of the Oblonskys. The wife did not leave her own apartments. The husband had not been home for 2 days. The children ran wild all over the house. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote to a friend asking her to look out for a new employ for her. The man cook had walked off the day before just at dinner time. The kitchen maid and the coachman had given warning. 2 days after the quarrel, Prince Stepan Arkadyevich Oblonsky, Stiva, as he was called in the fashionable world, woke up at his usual hour, that is, at 8 o'clock in the morning. Not in his wife's bedroom, but on the leather-covered sofa in his study. He turned over his stout, well-cared-for person on the springy sofa, as though he would sink into a long sleep again. He vigorously embraced the pillow on its other side and buried his face in it. But all at once he jumped up, sat up on the sofa, and opened his eyes. Yes. How was it now? He thought, going over his dream. Yes. How was it? Yes. Olivin was giving a dinner at Darmstadt. No, not Darmstadt, but something American. Yes. But then, Darmstadt was in America. Yes. Olivin was giving a dinner on glass tables, and the tables sang, Il mio tesoro. No, not Il mio tesoro, but something better. And there were some sort of little decanters on the table, and, at the same time, these decanters were women, he recalled. Stepan Arkadyevich's eyes twinkled gaily, and he pondered with a smile. Yes, it was jolly, very jolly. There was a great deal more that was delightful. Only there's no putting it into words, or even expressing it in one's waking thoughts. And noticing a gleam of light peeping in beside one of the woolen cloth curtains, he cheerfully dropped his feet over the edge of the sofa and felt about with them for his slippers. A present on his last birthday, worked for him by his wife on gold-colored morocco. And, as he used to do for the last 9 years, he stretched out his hand, without getting up, toward the place where his dressing gown always hung in the bedroom. And thereupon he suddenly remembered that he was not sleeping in his wife's room, but in his study, as well as the reason. The smile vanished from his face, and he knit his brows. Ooh, he muttered, recalling everything that had happened. And again every detail of his quarrel with his wife was present to his imagination, all the hopelessness of his position, and, worst of all, his own fault. Yes, she won't forgive me, and she can't forgive me. And the most awful thing about it is that it's all my fault, though I'm not to blame. That's the point of the whole tragedy. He reflected. Oh. He kept repeating in despair, as he remembered the acutely painful sensations caused him by this quarrel. Most unpleasant of all was the first minute when, on coming from the theater, good-humored and light-hearted, with a huge pear in his hand for his wife, he had not found his wife in the drawing-room, to his surprise, nor in the study, but saw her at last in her bedroom, clutching the unlucky letter that revealed everything. She, his dolly, forever fussing and worrying over household details, and limited in her ideas, as he considered, was sitting motionless with the letter in her hand, looking at him with an expression of horror, despair and indignation. What is this? This, she asked, pointing to the letter. And at this recollection, Stepan Arkadyevitch, as is so often the case, was not so much annoyed at the fact itself as at the way in which he had met his wife's words. There happened to him at that instant that which happens to people when they are unexpectedly caught in something very disgraceful. He did not succeed in adapting his face to the situation in which he was placed toward his wife by the discovery of his fault. Instead of being hurt, denying, defending himself, begging forgiveness, instead of remaining indifferent even, anything would have been better than what he did do, his face utterly without his volition, cerebral reflexes. Mused Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was fond of physiology, had assumed its habitual good-humored, and therefore stupid, smile. This stupid smile he could not forgive himself. Catching sight of that smile, Dolly shuddered as though from physical pain, broke out with her characteristic heat into a flood of cruel words, and rushed out of the room. Since then she had refused to see her husband. It's all the fault of that stupid smile. Stepan Arkadyevitch was thinking. But what's to be done? What's to be done? He kept saying to himself in despair, and found no answer. Chapter 2. Stepan Arkadyevitch was a truthful man in his relations with himself. He was incapable of self-deception and of persuading himself that he repented his conduct. He could not at this date repent the fact that he, handsome, susceptible to love, a man of 34, was not in love with his wife, the mother of 5 living and 2 dead children, and only a year younger than himself. All he repented was that he had not succeeded better in hiding this from his wife. But he felt all the difficulty of his position and was sorry for his wife, his children, and himself. Possibly he might have managed to conceal his sins better from his wife if he had anticipated that the knowledge of them would have had such an effect upon her. He had never clearly reflected on the subject, but he had vaguely conceived that his wife must long ago have suspected him of being unfaithful to her, and had shut her eyes to the fact. He had even supposed that she, a worn-out woman no longer young or good-looking, and in no way remarkable or uncommon, merely a good mother, ought from a sense of fairness to take an indulgent view. It had turned out quite the other way. Oh, it's awful. Oh dear. Oh dear. Awful. Stepan Arkadyevitch kept repeating to himself. And he could think of nothing to be done. And how well things were going up till now. How well we got on. She was contented and happy in her children. I never interfered with her in anything. I let her manage the children and the house just as she liked. True, it's bad her having been a governess in our house. That's bad. There's something common, vulgar, in flirting with one's governess. But what a governess! He vividly recalled the roguish black eyes of Mli, Roland, and her smile. But after all, while she was in the house, I kept myself in hand. And the worst of it all is that she's already. It seems as if ill luck would have it so. Oh. But what is to be done? There was no solution, save that universal solution which life gives to all questions, even the most complex and insolvable. One must live in the needs of the day, that is, forget oneself. To forget himself in sleep was impossible now, at least till night-time. He could not go back now to the music sung by the decanter women, so he must forget himself in the dream of daily life. Then we shall see, Stepan Arkadyevitch said to himself. And getting up he put on a gray dressing gown lined with blue silk, tied the tassels in a knot, and, drawing a deep breath of air into his broad chest, he walked to the window with his usual confident step, turning out his feet that carried his full frame so easily. He pulled up the blind and rang the bell loudly. It was at once answered by the appearance of an old friend, his valet, Matvey, carrying his clothes, his boots, and a telegram. Matvey was followed by the barber with all the necessaries for shaving. "Are there any papers from the board?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, taking the telegram and seating himself at the looking-glass. "On the table," replied Matvey, glancing with inquiring sympathy at his master. And, after a short pause, he added with a sly smile, They've sent from the carriage jobber." Stepan Arkadyevitch made no reply, but merely glanced at Matvey in the looking-glass. The glance, in which their eyes met in the looking-glass, made it clear that they understood one another. Stepan Arkadyevitch's eyes seemed to ask, "Why do you tell me that? Don't you know?" Matvey put his hands in his jacket pockets, thrust out one leg, and gazed silently, with a good-humored, faint smile, at his master. "I told them to come on Sunday, and till then not to trouble you or themselves for nothing," he said. He had obviously prepared the sentence beforehand. Stepan Arkadyevitch saw Matvey wanted to make a joke and attract attention to himself. Tearing open the telegram, he read it through, guessing at the words, misspelled as they always are in telegrams, and his face brightened. "Matvey, my sister Anna Arkadyevna will be here tomorrow," he said, checking for a minute the sleek, plump hand of the barber, cutting a pink path between his long, curly side whiskers. "Thank God," said Matvey, showing by this response that he, like his master, realized the significance of this arrival. Anna Arkadyevna, the sister his master was so fond of, might bring about a reconciliation between husband and wife. Alone, or with her husband? Inquired Matvey. Stepan Arkadyevitch could not answer, as the barber was at work on his upper lip, and he raised one finger. Matvey nodded at the looking-glass. "Alone. Is the room to be got ready upstairs? Inform Darya Alexandrovna, where she orders." "Darya Alexandrovna?" Matvey repeated, as though in doubt. "Yes. Inform her. Here, take the telegram. Give it to her, and then do what she tells you." "You want to try it out?" Matvey guessed, but only said, "Yes, sir." Stepan Arkadyevitch was already washed and combed and ready to be dressed, when Matvey, stepping slowly in his creaky boots, came back into the room with the telegram in his hand. The barber had gone. "Darya Alexandrovna told me to inform you that she is going away." "Let him. That is, you do as he likes," he said, laughing only with his eyes, and, putting his hands in his pockets, he watched his master with his head on one side. Stepan Arkadyevitch was silent a minute. Then a good-humored and rather pitiful smile showed itself on his handsome face. Matvey?" he said, shaking his head. "Never mind, sir. Everything will come round," said Matvey. "Come round. Just so, sir." "Do you think so? Who's there?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, hearing the rustle of a woman's dress at the door. "It's I," said a firm, pleasant feminine voice, and the stern, pockmarked face of Matryona Filimonovna, the nurse, was thrust in at the door. "Well, what's the matter, Matryosha?" queried Stepan Arkadyevitch, meeting her in the doorway. Although Stepan Arkadyevitch was completely in the wrong as regards his wife, and was conscious of this himself, almost everyone in the house, even the nurse, Darya Alexandrovna's chief ally, was on his side. "Well, what now?" he asked cheerlessly. "Go to her, sir. Own your fault again. Maybe God will aid you. She is suffering so. It's pitiful to see her, and besides, everything in the house is topsy-turvy. You must have pity, sir, on the children. Beg her forgiveness, sir. There's no help for it. One must pay the piper. But she won't see me. You do your part. God is merciful. Pray to God. Sir, pray to God." "Come, that'll do. You can go," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, blushing suddenly. "Well, now, let's dress." He turned to Matvey and resolutely threw off his dressing gown. Matvey was already holding up the shirt like a horse's collar, and, blowing off some invisible speck, he slipped it with obvious pleasure over the well-cared-for person of his master. Chapter 3. When he was dressed, Stepan Arkadyevitch sprinkled some scent on himself, pulled down his shirt cuffs, distributed into his pockets his cigarettes, pocketbook, matches and watch, with its double chain and seals, and, shaking out his handkerchief, feeling himself clean, fragrant, healthy and physically at ease. In spite of his misfortune, he walked with a slight swing of each leg into the dining room, where coffee was already waiting for him, and, alongside of his cup, the letters and papers from the office. He read the letters. One was very unpleasant, from a merchant who was buying a forest on his wife's property. To sell this forest was absolutely essential, but at present, until he was reconciled with his wife, the subject could not be discussed. The most unpleasant thing of all was that his pecuniary interests should in this way enter into the question of his reconciliation with his wife. And the idea that he might be led on by his interests, that he might seek a reconciliation with his wife on account of the sale of the forest, that idea hurt him. When he had finished his letters, Stepan Arkadyevitch moved the office papers close to him, rapidly looked through 2 cases, made a few notes with a big pencil, and, pushing away the papers, turned to his coffee. Sipping it, he opened a still damp morning paper and began to read it. Stepan Arkadyevitch took in and read a liberal paper, not an extreme one, but one advocating the views held by the majority. And in spite of the fact that science, art, and politics had no special interest for him, he firmly held those views on all these subjects which were held by the majority and by his paper, and he only changed them when the majority changed them, or, more strictly speaking, he did not change them, but they imperceptibly changed of themselves within him. Stepan Arkadyevitch had not chosen his political opinions or his views. These political opinions and views had come to him of themselves, just as he did not choose the shapes of his hat and coat, but simply accepted those that were being worn. And for him, living in a certain society, owing to the need, ordinarily developed at years of discretion, for some degree of mental activity, to have views was just as indispensable as to have a hat. If there was a reason for his preferring liberal to conservative views, which were held also by many of his circle, it arose not from his considering liberalism more rational, but from its being in closer accordance with his manner of life. The Liberal party said that in Russia everything was wrong, and indeed Stepan Arkadyevitch had many debts and was decidedly short of money. The Liberal party said that marriage was an institution quite out of date, and that it stood in need of reconstruction. And indeed family life afforded Stepan Arkadyevitch little gratification, and forced him into lying and hypocrisy, which were so repulsive to his nature. The Liberal party said, or rather allowed it to be understood, that religion was only a curb to keep in check the barbarous classes of the people. And indeed Stepan Arkadyevitch could not stand through even a short service without his legs aching, and could never make out what was the object of all the terrible and high-flown language about another world, when life might be so very amusing in this world. And with all this Stepan Arkadyevitch, who liked a merry joke, was fond of embarrassing some plain man by saying that if one were to pride oneself on one's origin, one ought not to stop at Rurik and disown the founder of the line, the monkey. And so liberalism had become a habit of Stepan Arkadyevitch, and he liked his newspaper, as he did his cigar after dinner, for the slight fog it diffused in his brain. He read the leading article, which maintained that it was quite senseless in our day to raise an outcry that radicalism was threatening to swallow up all conservative elements, and that the government ought to take measures to crush the revolutionary hydra. That, on the contrary, in our opinion the danger lies not in that imaginary revolutionary hydra, but in the obstinacy of traditionalism clogging progress, etc., etc. He read another article, too, a financial one, which alluded to Bentham and Mill, and dropped some innuendos reflecting on the ministry. With his characteristic quick-wittedness, he caught the drift of each innuendo, divined whence it came, at whom and on what ground it was aimed, and that afforded him, as it always did, a certain gratification. But today that gratification was embittered by Matriona Filimonovna's advice and the unsatisfactory state of his household. He read, too, that Count Beist was rumored to have left for Wiesbaden, and that one need have no more gray hair, and of the sale of a light carriage, and of a young person seeking a situation. But these items of information did not give him, as usual, a quiet, ironical gratification. Having finished the paper, a second cup of coffee and a roll and butter, he got up, shaking the crumbs off his waistcoat, and, squaring his broad chest, he smiled joyously.